I think it's fair to say that climate policies at the moment are perceived as perhaps a lower priority than they have been in the past. But of course, at the same time, we see more and more the impacts of climate change. So what does that mean for the work of DG Klima and the European Commission at the moment?
Yeah, I think we have to acknowledge that there is much more at stake these days than climate change. What we see happening across the world is that there is a questioning of science. There is growing disinformation and misinformation. The rule of law is being put into question. We see that there are many questions asked about the future of multilateral collaboration. We also see that values like collective security, global solidarity are being questioned, maybe even ridiculed by some global leaders. So all that is happening, and these are values and principles that have brought us peace and prosperity for many decades. But if you look at each of these values and principles, actually climate is the nexus where all these things come together. If you talk about multilateral collaboration, rule of law, collective security, global solidarity, it all comes together in climate change. So I think we really need to tell the story that climate is about much more than protecting the planet. It's protecting the planet for sure, but it's also protecting people. It's about protecting our prosperity in the future. It looks as if everything is changing these days, but there is one thing that is certain and that will not change, and that's climate change. And obviously, it's very different from 2019 when we launched the climate ambition as part of the overall Green Deal. In 2019, as you will remember, Tim, it was as if the whole of Europe wanted the Commission to be greener and greener and greener, more ambitious on climate. Except for the far right, everyone wanted to be green at that point in time. But it's also fair to say that we were rather isolated in the world. It was only Europe that had that stated ambition of decarbonization. If you fast forward 5 years, where we are today, it's the opposite. Basically, what we now see is that many people are concerned, worried about the affordability, the costs, the feasibility of this whole transition, fueled often by disinformation on social media, but often also with legitimate questions about what it means for their family, their livelihoods. At the same time, we also see that this global race to net zero is going on. It's no longer only Europe. We see what is happening in China. That has made the green transition its growth strategy, as we said we would do in 2019. And very interesting, I find, is that the part of the world that is investing most rapidly now in renewables are the Gulf countries, who have a real agenda of modernizing their economy with renewable energy, because that's the most cost efficient, some part of nuclear as well. But obviously they would like to keep Europe dependent on their oil and gas exports that would give them revenues. So there is a global race to net zero, which we cannot miss. It's also increasingly security agenda. Security in the sense that we are very dependent on imports of fossil fuels. We don't have fossil endowments. We pay an astronomical price, more than 400 billion euros a year for importing oil and gas. And it makes us very dependent on regimes that we do not always want to be dependent on, as we've experienced with Russia. But we also see, as you mentioned, the increasing impacts of climate change, which we all start feeling tangibly more and more. So it means that for us, for Europe, staying the course on our climate agenda is really existential. for ecological reasons, and maybe even more for economic, security, and geopolitical reasons. So I think what we need to do is stay the course, paint it less in green, call it more clean than green, look more at the economics of it rather than only the ecology, and really design and explain our climate agenda as an agenda of modernization of our economy. What we're doing with our climate agenda is bringing an innovation and investment shock therapy to our economy, which we need in order to strengthen our productivity and thereby improve our global competitiveness. And that is exactly what Mr. Draghi has said in his famous Draghi report. He has rightly said decarbonization can and must be a driver of competitiveness and of economic growth. He added the important condition that this will be the case if all policies are aligned to that goal. And that's what I see as a task for us, is to make sure that all policies, all DGs are compelled and attracted to work with us for that goal. But we also have to explain this to the public and to the political leaders that this is not about saving the planet. It's about modernizing our economy to make it fit for a future that will be less hospitable, less friendly to Europe than it was in the past decades.
Okay, well, I think that's a great explanation of the situation we find ourselves in. So, in practical terms, what has that meant for for DG Klima in the last 6 months since the start of this new Commission mandate? What has Klima done? What have we produced? What have we worked on as a Commission to respond to that new reality?
It's been a very busy 6 months. It feels more than 6 months. But I think what we are doing is staying the course. And I see this at two levels. One level is implementing what has been agreed in the past mandate. It is really very impressive to see what has been agreed in the past mandate. So we now have a job of implementing all this, and this is what colleagues across the DG are doing. If I look, for example, at implementing the emission trading system, extending it to new sectors like maritime, putting in place the extension of ETS to buildings and road transport, but also making sure that the registry for ETS is secure enough. If I look at what we're doing with the Innovation Fund and the Modernization Fund, for example, which is really groundbreaking and unrivaled in the world. If I look at what we do with the member states in terms of national energy and climate plans that are really becoming true investment plans. If I look at the work that is being done on adaptation, where, for example, with the mission adaptation, we are helping more than 300 regions to become as climate resilient as possible by 2030. If I look at the work we do on the international front, both in preparing the COP, and colleagues are this week and next week in Bonn for the sessions of the subsidiary bodies there, but also bilaterally in the Climate Club with the G7, G20. Hard work, but we stay the course in implementing all these policies. So that's the implementation. But what we're also doing, and I'm very grateful for all the work being done on this, is making sure that strategically we are well covered. And there, I think there are two things that I would particularly want to mention. One is that we have found the right place to integrate climate action into the competitiveness compass. As Mr. Draghi has said, decarbonization as a driver of growth and competitiveness. We have been with DG Klima leading in designing and writing the Clean Industrial Deal, where many of the actions are inspired by and will be implemented by DG Klima. For example, the Industrial Decarbonization Bank, but also the lead markets for low carbon steel, low carbon cement. These are only a few examples. And so we are strategically positioning ourselves very well for this whole mandate. The other big dimension is preparedness, resilience, adaptation, if you like. I think it's very well understood now that climate adaptation is part of the whole preparedness union. And we are working towards the European Climate Adaptation Plan, which will be presented next year. So the two big dimensions of our climate ambition for becoming climate neutral and resilient by 2050, both decarbonization, mitigation, and adaptation, resilience, we are positioned strategically to make sure that this mandate will deliver on that.
Okay, so we've built some solid foundations, but we're coming towards the end of June. I think there's a lot of anticipation for new things to happen in July from Klima. So what should people be looking out for in the weeks ahead?
Well, we're not sitting still. There's a lot of work being done, and the fact that there is less support for climate action doesn't mean that we lower the bar. We continue. We have a couple of big initiatives coming up. Everyone is looking forward to the proposal for amending the climate law, going for an emission reduction target of 90% by 2040. That is eagerly anticipated, but also very necessary because it will clearly give the predictability to businesses, investors, that we will stay the course and that there will be a return on investment for those that participate in the greening of our economy. That's only the first stage of it, because then as of the second part of next year, we'll have to come with the whole policy architecture that we will need to bring us on track for 90% reduction in a very cost-efficient manner. Our policy framework is very fit for 2030. It is not fit for cost-efficient reduction up to going to from 2030 to 2040. So that's a big job we will have to do, and which we will do for sure. We will also come in the autumn with a vision on climate and energy diplomacy, leading up to COP30 in Belém, where the European Union will be expected to have a very strong voice and keep the global agenda going. We have an interest in building lots of alliances with like-minded countries, partners in the world. So also on the international side, there's a lot of work coming to us. And then lastly, of course, as I mentioned, we have the European Climate Adaptation Plan that we're already starting to prepare based on the first ever European climate risk assessments that we published last year. So lots of work coming. We will not be sitting still. One additional file that I would mention, which will be very important for us, is the multi-annual financial framework that will be presented by the Commission on the 16th of July to start the new budget as from 2028. And that, of course, will also be very determining for the success of our climate ambition.
Thanks, Kurt. I think it's really interesting. I mean, you've really set the scene of what the next few months and next few years hold